Welcome everybody to this new presentation of LABITCONF. Yes, these short interviews that we will be doing during the year before we get to our new experience, LABITCONF experience, eventually this year in March. So we invited today Andreas Antonopoulos and Gutiérrez Zaldívar to discuss, among the three, one of the topics that is in my main concern these days. We have a lot of people coming and joining the space because of the price, mostly because of the price, and listening about this, and eventually not doing all the research and all the understanding about Bitcoin, about the past experiences, about how Bitcoin goes up and down, and to be ready to survive all these slopes in the Bitcoin price construction and all the process when it creates trust and builds like Bitcoin's future. So I wanted we will be discussing what could eventually happen in the near future or in the long future to Bitcoin that could eventually affect the price. We want to prepare you the newcomer, to be ready to survive all these price movements, yes, with the believing and understanding how Bitcoin goes beyond all these future crises that might occur. So thank you, Andreas, for joining us today. For those who might not know, Andreas is the #1 thought leader in the space, and I think the person that...
No, I'm the #3 thought leader in the space.
No.
It's Elon Musk, Michael Saylor, and then me.
You're right.
So
I think
I've fallen in the rankings. It's okay,
yes.
Don't worry.
Actually, let me say this. I shared this insight with Diego the other day. Yes, I think that somehow Satoshi Nakamoto created the paper, and it was the start of all this art. But you've been the one who helped the most for creating believers for this niche.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you to say.
You was the one who created the base of understanding and created the hodlers. Yes, I think that most of what's happening today and the past that we will see, you was the one who helped people to understand all these situations. And
yeah, the other layers, the ideological layers behind it, no? Because I think, the Bitcoin is so complex that you have the technology, but that technology reflects in certain changes in society that are difficult to understand. And I think, I would say, Andreas, what you did that for me is very valuable, and it's exactly that. It's like explaining in simple terms, in terms that anybody can understand, what are the true implications. And
thank you.
One of the threats I want to discuss later on, I don't want to hijack Rodolfo's moderation, but it's around what you just mentioned as a joke. No, it's like about, okay, I'm #3 now. It's like we have Elon Musk, we have Michael Saylor, but you have this trend, and I think it's okay, because all these newcomers into a space, but that there are people that is well regarded and known in the mainstream space, are coming, but with a different perspective, not necessarily understanding the true depth of what we are doing. It's just like, for them, is kind of a fade or maybe an opportunistic situation. Although I think some of them are, true believers, but not necessarily understanding all the depth. It took me like maybe 2-3 years to understand many of the dimensions, and I would say even like 6 years after getting into Bitcoin, I was still understanding part of the dynamics of the consensus protocol and certain elements that are subtle but very, very important for the true nature of what Bitcoin is. No.
Yeah, it never gets boring. There's so many layers of nuance and detail that we're all still learning. I mean, I don't think I'm finished, for sure. I'm still surprised by things I learn about Bitcoin.
Yes, and even though people might come because of the price, yes, they stay because of the reasons. And I think that explaining the reasons and the philosophy behind and what's really important in Bitcoin that has been and will be always your role. Yes, I think that Sailor, it's like the next step. No, once you created all these believers, yes, and we supported getting Bitcoin here. He is helping to drive with also a very eloquent way of speaking. Yes, it's very good speaking.
Yeah, I'm very happy to fade into the background. In fact, one of my favorite things is to hear people who join, new people who join, repeat some of the things that I said 5, 6, 7 years ago, and sometimes even repeat them to me as a helpful lesson, and that's great actually, because one of the key concepts behind Bitcoin is that it's not about authority, it's not about influencers, it's not about leadership. It's about understanding principles and being able to express them clearly. And if somebody else has taken something I've said and is using it, that's the best gift for me. It says that it had meaning, and that meaning resonated enough that they wanted to repeat it to others. And that means that's much more powerful, because then I don't have to say it anymore. It runs off on its own and does its work.
I think if we are successful,
and I can retire, because honestly, I would like to retire at some point.
If we are successful, we will fade into the background, and also with the technology, because I think.
But without the principles fading.
We've been doing this since 2013. Yes, we've been actively talking and promoting Bitcoin and assuming the responsibility of being a face in the space. Yes, to promote this. But I think that we've been doing this believing the same things that we believe today. Yes, we were convinced then about what people is getting convinced now. Yes, and I don't think really people just repeats what says. People go through the process of understanding, and once they understand, it certifies that what we were saying, it's part of the actual process of understanding. Yes, people repeat things, but they repeat it also because they get to that point once they went through understanding Bitcoin. I think it's like yes, it's a certification that what we said was true somehow.
Well, yeah,
and validated, no? That they are not. I think what you are saying, Rodolfo, is that people is not repeating chess as like automatas, but they are like actually going through a process of understanding. And once they make the terms or the concepts their own, then they repeat it. And that's the interesting thing, because this is also this maxim from Bitcoin: don't trust, verify, and it's verify. The blockchain or the transactions independently, but it's also verify, the ideas independently, test them, and if they stand your test, then you can make them your own. It's like
legal process. You need to believe this.
Yeah.
So repeating, even though if it's repeating, yes. Yeah. Actually, it's like a process.
But I think, Rodolfo, we need to get into it, because in more sensationalistic terms, what we want to discuss today is what could kill Bitcoin. No, it's the honey badger, the Bitcoin honey badger. I mean, we always use this.
But we've all gone through this process, right? I think all of us, when we first got involved in Bitcoin, we look at it and we go, okay, this is too good to be true. Now let me figure out, how is this flawed? And then you're like, okay, it's going to get attacked this way. And then you read more and you're like, oh, that wouldn't work. And then you try to find ways to break it. Certainly that's what I did. I spent months trying to find what the catch was, what the failure or weakness was, and I'm still looking. It's been years, and obviously my confidence increases as I find more and more reasons why it can't break. But I'm never certain. I'm never 100% certain. I'm just like increasingly convinced that all of the ways that I thought it could break have been tested and haven't broken it. So
and also it's
let's
a process,
take people on that journey, right?
Also, it's a process, because things that could have break Bitcoin in the early days are not applicable today because of certain things. So it's also not a static process. It's like
it's an evolution.
It was Bitcoin was much weaker and feeble when it was like only Satoshi and maybe Halfini and one or two miners, but it was disregarded for a long period of time. And thanks to that, Bitcoin grew stronger, more decentralized, and a lot of things happen.
That Diego brings us to the first topic of today. Yes, we will divide this into parts: past and future. Understanding past, it's important because when these kind of things occur again, like an exchange hack, seizure of some platforms or whatever, we already been there. Yes, we already went through this, and we already know how much impact it has or it has not. If China says something, or so we've been there. Let's discuss the past. Yes, for these newcomers to create a believe that this won't affect Bitcoin, and let's discuss the future. So in the past, the first topic was Bitcoin was birth was in 2009, but it could have died there. Yes, it could have been just 2 or 3 people and been attacked or whatever, and it could have been dead in that same moment. As you said, Halfini and Satoshi among themselves, it could have been there, but it was not. Yes, the concept behind and the proposal was strong enough to drive more people's attention. No? And this is what's been happening. I mean, it could drive no more attention from anyone, but it's been driving since the last 12 years.
And I think the more like the first thing you question, is like the technology. It's like if the technology can work or the bugs. So the technical aspects is this possible? Is this viable? And Bitcoin had some bugs in the past. So from a technology, I for example, Sergio Lerner, my partner at RSK, he came to actually destroy Bitcoin. He wanted to like, from a technical perspective, he came to attack Bitcoin and to find like flaws. Indeed, he found like 9 security, some of them like very, very important security bugs in Bitcoin. But he came with that, and then when he realized how, the beauty of Bitcoin and all the amazing things that Bitcoin, he stood into Bitcoin to protect it. But in the first place, he wanted to like disregard the idea, to say this is not going to work, this is not going. So that was the initial approach to Bitcoin, and I think those people who came to attack it and then embrace it and protect it and make it stronger, provided a great service. No, I think Andreas, you. Not necessarily in the same way, but you also came from a technical perspective and to analyze.
Yeah, I mean,
Bitcoin,
I was working in information security, and my professional background was breaking into security systems. So that's also what I did. I tried to break it, I was unable to. I was late. I think a lot of the most serious bugs had already been addressed by the time I got in 2013. And at that point, there were, it was mid-2012 actually. At that point, there were denial of service bugs, but not really serious bugs. So yeah, let's dive in. Let's dive in. I'm excited to have this conversation.
In 2010, we had one of the first very relevant bugs. Yes, we had someone minting, I think in one block, 180,000 bitcoins. Yes, so this was.
No, it was billion. It was
1 million.
It was billions of bitcoins. It was actually, yeah. So I think it was 1.8 billion bitcoin. It was more than the 21 million limit.
I think it was millions, 3 billions. But the thing is, we had this promise that we will always have 21 million. How can this be so secure and stuff like that? But then you have someone bugging the code and being able to add bitcoins. And actually, this was a big crisis at the moment. Yes, yeah. It was very quickly solved. Yes, the bug was understood, which was the problem, and the new update of the platform of the nodes were promoted, and we had one of the first rollbacks, I guess.
Yeah, but that's one interesting thing, because that was possible to be done in that way because the community got together and made a decision. So
and it was small enough.
Because the community was small enough. That kind of solution would not be possible today, and that's why I was saying, like, also like this is a moving target. It's not like Bitcoin is the same that it was in the early days, and many things that happened in the past cannot happen today anymore, because Bitcoin, as the economy of Bitcoin is based on economic incentives. No? It's not only technology, and that's a key element of it. So as the economy grows, it becomes more decentralized. It becomes more difficult to change in a coordinated way from from central entities or a group of people. No, and we have other examples of that. Some attempts with the scaling debate, where people tried to push certain protocol changes in a concerted way, and they couldn't do it. So that's also an interesting thing. Those bugs were addressed from a community, standpoint, and that kind of reactions in Bitcoin are no longer possible. No.
Yes, Andreas.
Yeah, this is one of the questions that comes up very often, which is a lot of people come in and they think that a rule like there cannot be 21 million Bitcoin, there will always be less than 21 million Bitcoin, is something that is unenforceable, that you can't actually make that happen, because they think, okay, so you get to whenever the Bitcoin stops and then you just don't stop. What they don't realize is that that's not how the system is built. They don't understand why you can set a rule like that in place and actually enforce it so that you don't issue more than 21 million Bitcoin. Because in their mind, what happens is you just keep issuing Bitcoin, right? And then in the year 2141, you say, okay, now we stop. And then everyone goes, no, let's keep going. And of course, if that's how it worked, that would be very difficult to do, because if you suddenly said stop, then people would object. They would be, no, let's keep going. In fact, the miners themselves would want to keep going. But here's the interesting thing. The way I explain this, and it's, I think, easier to think about, is let's think of this 140 years of Bitcoin's issuance as 141 kilometers, right? And you're driving your car to this destination, which is 141 kilometers down the road. And you start off at 50 kilometers an hour. And every few seconds, you apply the brake. A bit more, and you slow down. And in the first few seconds, you go from 50 to 25 kilometers an hour. Then you go from 25 to 12 kilometers an hour. Then you go from 12 to 6 kilometers an hour. And you keep braking all the time, continuously. The entire journey of 140 kilometers, you're applying the brakes. Now, when you get to that 140 kilometers away, you're now moving at 1 millimeter per day. At this point, if everyone said, okay, take your foot off the brake, so what? Now it's going to take you it's going to take you 1,000 days to go a centimeter beyond that mark. Even if at that point you said, listen, we're doing a Satoshi per block, stop applying the brakes, I want to continue issuing 1 Satoshi per block, go ahead. It's going to take you 100 million blocks to get to 1 Bitcoin over the 21 million limit. So
the incentives are gone way before you go to that point.
So
exactly.
If you want to object to the 21 million Bitcoin thing, you should have objected on January 3rd, 2009 and said, let's not do 50, let's keep going. Or on 2012, when it reduced to 25, you should have gone, no, let's not reduce it, let's keep it 50. Today, you should object to issuing 6.25. You should say, let's issue more than 6.25 today. But today, because the destination is so far away and the incentives have balanced now, there isn't enough motivation and enough consensus to get enough people on the side of let's issue more. And that motivation keeps draining away. And by the time you get to the point where you say, we're not issuing enough, it's already too late. So this is brilliant in the in the design, right? Because you have to say at the beginning of the journey, you have to say, take your foot off the brake now, not at the end when you're going a millimeter a day forward.
I think we have just 10 more years of minting like full Bitcoins. Yes. So the next 10 years are the next years that you need to keep hoarding. No? If you want to hoard, you have 10 years to do it. And that's it, eventually. But actually, my focus is a bit different of why we want to go beyond. And if we do it in these insignificant amounts, it's because as value has to do with trust, if the community will never destroy the main pillar of the trust, which has
of course, absolutely not.
So if you need to bring all these huge players to decide, huge players is each of us, yes, this huge community to decide to change the pillar of the trust of the coin, it will never happen.
By cutting off their own leg, I mean, effectively, every single person who has to make that decision has to damage their own value.
Let's go forward. So we did have a bug, we did have a rollback, it was small enough, no problem, we went on, crisis went on.
So we can say that technical bugs, because Bitcoin has been quite stable, wouldn't be a threat for the future, but they were a threat in the past.
And that's it. It's a live program. It's a code. It's open source. It is there to be tested and to be evaluated and hijacked if it can. But just once that happens, you can solve the code and go on. No. So then we had Bitcoinica and my wallet. I don't remember, in 2011. Yes, the main wallets, which were online wallets, yes, had a hack, and most of the people who had their coins, they understood, even though they had the hack and those coins were lost. One of the things that starts to be understood is that not your coins, not your Bitcoins. It was a problem for those who lost the coins.
Not your keys, not your Bitcoins.
Not your keys, not your coins. Yeah, sorry. Not your keys, not your coins, which is something that Andreas says so actively, no, in every talk. So yes, we did have hacks in the past of online wallets, yes, but that's just an issue for the few people who lost those coins. But it's something that it's being learned for the rest of the community. No, some of the impacts some, but it's part of the growth of the whole. No,
but that is a current threat, I would say, no, because it's like that is the counterparty threat. I mean, we are moving, okay, from a technical perspective, the more years, I mean, software has this hardening process where the more years you have the software live, the more eyes you have, the more stable the code gets, the tougher it is to breach it. And I think Bitcoin, after 12 years, we can say that the technical aspects or threats of Bitcoin are highly minimized or reduced unless we do like big changes, no?
For the decentralized aspects of Bitcoin, yes.
Yes.
But that doesn't change the asymmetric risk that centralized services built on top of Bitcoin have.
Exactly.
It will always be more risky to put all of your money in one place with the keys under one organization, because when you centralize that risk, let's say you have 100,000 customers who have funds. If you have those 100,000 customers with each having their own wallet, you have to break into 100,000 computers or rob 100,000 homes or find a vulnerability in all of the wallets, and they're probably going to be different. So that decentralization, that diversity ensures that since everybody uses different security models, different software, different approaches to risk, you can't hack all of them at the same time. Just like if I wanted to take the money out of your wallet, Rodolfo, and out of your wallet, Diego, I have to come visit you, right? And even if it's digital, I have to visit your computer. It's much more difficult. But if you put all of that together in one place, if I got you and Diego and everybody else to take the money out of their wallets and put it in a big box in the middle of the in a main square in Buenos Aires, now all I have to do is break into that one box and I can get everybody's cash, right? So centralized risk will always be a problem in Bitcoin, and the not your keys, not your coins slogan reminds us of that fact.
Yes, and this brings us to the next topic. Yes, and this is how these concepts are being like stored in people's mind. Yes, we had this big hack. That was the first moment that people really understood. Hey, fortunately, it was not to me, but if not my keys, not my coins. And then we had the empty box hack. Let me put in focus what was empty box in 2011. Yes, it was 95% of all the trades were done through empty box. Yes, and everyone would say, yes, it's not decentralized, but every other is so small, there's no sense to decentralize these. Yes, let's keep doing trades on empty box. It was too big and it failed. It had a crash in 2011. Yes, a hack and a crash. It went the price to zero, and they did. That was just on the side, but 90% of the trades were done there. Yes, and they did a rollback of those trades in the platform, and we started to understand. Hey, platforms can do whatever they want with this, with the final numbers in their accounts. Yes, so this was a new understanding that not only your wallet, but your exchange, yes, it's not real numbers. It's a number in a database, yes, and it could be hacked, the exchange. Yes.
Well, and indeed, Bitcoin was born to provide a new way of handling money that didn't need those third parties, custodying your assets, no, and doing the custody of your assets. And I think that was a realization that if we go back to that model of having a centralized custodian, then we are losing the value of Bitcoin, which is so. I think that is a very important thing because that still remains. And for newcomers, we are doing this talk for the people who just joined or recently joined. They don't have that awareness because if you went through, all these centralized systems, or you were part of the MTGOX hack or different situations like that, there was a Bitstamp hack later on. There was we had many centralized systems be broken into. And if you were part of one of those, then you have that very present. But for newcomers, this is a new system and they don't have that. So, I think this is one of the remaining risks for Bitcoin, no? And now that we have corporations, and I think, what we are having is big holders of Bitcoins, and then maybe we'll expose others to those Bitcoins they have in custody, but they are intermediaries for those Bitcoins as well, no? So it's I think that is an interesting point.
I think there's also a false sense of comfort because, let's be honest, the exchanges we have today, the most popular ones, they're much better run. They're much better organized. They're much more professional. They're much more invested. They have much better infrastructure. So an attack or a failure of one of these would be more surprising. People who are new, you go into MTGOX and you see a site that's written in PHP, and every time the price volatility goes up, all of the trading engine starts exhibiting 3-minute delays and it chokes on its. Still, even today, when the volume goes up, Coinbase falls over, but it takes a lot more volume, literally 10,000 times more volume in order to bring them down. And they recover fairly gracefully. So when you see a much more polished experience, it might distract you from the fact that the fundamental risks of centralization are still there. And that's why we need to repeat this story and this lesson for new people. And I'm constantly surprised as to how many people still have enormous amounts of money in accounts on centralized exchanges without sufficient two-factor authentication, and then they get phished and lose all of their money, and they try to blame the exchanges or the companies, and they're like, I've sent you a customer service request, why can't you give me my money back?
And let's remember that two-factor authentication is not SMS.
Right. No, I mean, and sometimes not even that, but often SMS, but sometimes not even that. And that's kind of useless if you end up clicking on a link in an email and getting phished in real time, because then you're just going to put your two-factor into a...
Here is, even if Coinbase is hacked, even if Bitstamp or Binance or Bitfinex, as it was, is hacked again or once, yes, this is not Bitcoin. This is a third party. And we understand.
And it cannot kill Bitcoin. We've seen that. Even
this is not an issue. I mean, oh yes, it could happen. It might happen. It will happen. Yes, but we who are in this since long and which know the story, yes, we understand this not as a problem of Bitcoin. Newcomer will sell other Bitcoins and say, no, this is Bitcoin can be hacked, and newspapers will say Bitcoin was hacked. It's not Bitcoin. Yes, yeah. It's a thing. It's a
but I think yes, but I think there's another dimension, because as Andreas said, I think exchanges are getting better at what they do, professionalize, understanding how to manage Bitcoins in a more safer, controlled way, you know, hot wallets, cold wallets, like different models that have been established for many years now. So maybe the risk of hacking will tend to zero, let's say. But there are other dimensions of this. That is, these organizations, these exchanges are subject to nation state control because they are located in certain jurisdictions, and they have, so even if from a security perspective they are safe, they might not be safe from a jurisdictional perspective. So
we'll go into that. Let's go into that in the future, because it's one of the topics we discuss, and let's just.
But I think that's another thing we need to discuss. That is like, what if, you know, we know that if most Bitcoins are distributed and in the wallets of people who holds their keys, then Bitcoin is safe. But what happens if the majority of Bitcoins in circulation go to centralized parties? You know, that can be a threat for Bitcoin in a way, you know, if that's like the norm or the standard use of Bitcoin, no?
Let's go to this in the first topic, if you want, in the future. Yes, because it's a nice topic. Let's finish a bit of brief story of the past. Yes, we had a fork. We had an unfortunate, unwilling fork, 2013, an expected fork in the version 0.8. Yes.
Yeah, I watched that live. It was very exciting.
And it took only 3 hours to convince the whole community to go back to the version, the past version, solve the problem, yes, and recreate on top of that. And we had a rollback at that moment. Yes, I think there were like.
It wasn't a rollback. It was a normal reorganization. But it was a 26 block reorg of the chain, which isn't supposed to happen.
Mm-hmm. So, but we've been there. We've been there. If it happens again, we've been there. We know that it creates enough attention in the community to take an action and solve whatever might happen from it. We had Silk Road seizing 1.44 million thousand Bitcoins from Silk Road. Bitcoin was thought for drugs, and today people is talking about also lots of bad things of Bitcoin. Once we removed Silk Road from our road, Bitcoin price went from, it was in 120, it was the seizure, then it went to 72 or to, I don't remember what number, and then it went back to 266 after we removed all this concern of Bitcoin being only for drugs. It was shown that it has nothing to do, and the amount today of bad things being done on top of Bitcoin is
so that was the reputational threat, if you want, to Bitcoin. No, like that most governments were saying that Bitcoin was only a tool for criminals, and which is still relevant as an attack, I would say, to Bitcoin in the sense that many policymakers still like apply like a stronger rules to Bitcoin and crypto than they do to the traditional financial system, with the excuse of money laundering and financing of terrorism. So
unlicensed money laundering.
Yeah, sorry?
unlicensed money laundering.
Exactly.
Because licensed money laundering, as done by Deutsche Bank and HSBC and all of those, that is a whole other thing. Regulators are uncomfortable with unlicensed money laundering. They're very comfortable with licensed money laundering. In fact, they've demonstrated that repeatedly.
Yeah.
Yes, but well, that is another threat to Bitcoin, I would say. No, it's like
propaganda. Absolutely,
propaganda.
Yes.
But in 2013, we had China, yes, saying it will support somehow Bitcoin. Then it said it would be against Bitcoin, and all these governments, active big governments, where Bitcoin was being hosted or minted, and most of players were in China. Yes, it was 60% of the players at that time were from China. And it created like sensation of, oh, see, China could eventually prohibit or avoid miners to be there and stuff like that, and it dropped down the price again. And actually, there's nothing to do. Each
time China bans Bitcoin, the effect is reduced. So at this point, after China has banned Bitcoin 23 times, it's almost like that ban has a halving period, right? So after 23 halvings of the effect, now they ban Bitcoin, or India bans Bitcoin, and everyone's like, oh, here we go again.
Okay. So if you are a newcomer and you read these news about India and China and others banning, or we already don't care. I mean, the hodler, just honey badger doesn't care.
Yes, the other funny thing I always hear is this idea that when governments ban Bitcoin, that will cause its price to go down, which, by the way, has never happened in any market economy good ever. If you ban something, its price doesn't go down, it goes up, right? It always goes up. And that applies if you ban narcotics, for example, and we've seen that in the opposite way, right? So in the US, they legalized, in many states, they've legalized marijuana, and now, the price of marijuana is approaching that of broccoli, because agriculturally, it's not that different, right? So if you can produce wine or broccoli or tomatoes at the same cost, there's no reason why it should cost 10 times more. There is prohibition, and when you prohibit something, it drives the price up. And we've seen that happen. When they ban it in India, the price goes through the roof. When they try to ban it in Nigeria, the price goes through the roof. When they have banned it in Venezuela, when it's difficult with currency controls in Argentina, the price goes up. All of these countries have a Bitcoin price premium. Now, what that price premium does is it subsidizes the importation of Bitcoin into those countries, meaning that anybody who does bring Bitcoin into those countries gets to sell it with a 30% markup to all of the people who are desperately trying to get it in a market where it's difficult to get. And there's one very important thing to understand about bans. When your government bans Bitcoin, is the moment when you realize you really, really need Bitcoin, because they're telling you exactly what they're about to do to the national currency, especially when they do it in the same law where they're establishing a central bank digital currency, which is what India is doing. So they're like, we're taking the rupee digital and banning any competition. Well, why do you think they're doing that? Because they're about to take the rupee and shoot it in the head. And so at that point, you now know that you must desperately get Bitcoin if you are in India, because it is the only way you're going to save yourself. They've just announced that the ship is sinking, and you'd better head for Bitcoin, the lifeboat, which means that the price of Bitcoin is going to be 30, 40, 50% higher in your country in rupee terms. And that means that anybody who takes the risk to import it, even though it's illegal, and to export rupees, even though that's illegal, will get paid a 30, 40, 50% premium to establish high volume operations with excellent customer service to deliver Bitcoin into the country where it's banned. Ironically, the government is subsidizing in the national currency the importation of Bitcoin by banning it.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on. Yes, we had, I will skip some of them. We had, FTGOX, bankruptcy, we already talked about FTGOX, but in 2014, we had over 51% of concentration of the mining power in one hand. Yes, we've been there. And
was it ghast.io?
I don't remember who was it.
I think it was one of the pools.
Yes,
Yeah, I think it was
Ghash. Yeah, I think it was.
And I don't
because
know
they started selling mining. That's when the business of selling hashing power started. So at certain point, they managed to get a lot of traction under the platform from third parties, from retail investors that were buying hashing power. Yeah.
So this is what happened. Yes, at that moment, they realized, yes, that holding over 51% was not risky itself. If I want to, when you have the 51%, 51%, it's not that it gets risky. It makes you decide if you want to keep doing the good thing or going against, no? But actually they realized that community, yes, could think that Bitcoin was in a risk because of holding over 51%, and they lowered the participation. They remove people from the pool. They cancel people from joining. Them. Yes, and the mining power was redistributed. Today, it's much more highly distributed than before. Like 4 or 5.
The amounts of pools we have today and the fractioning of hashing power on those pools is like much higher. That was also my point, that as the economy grows, decentralization grows. It's like, because there are economic incentives for newcomers to join the business, to build new services, and that creates fragmentation as the economy grows.
Yeah, it's really ironic because this is the fundamental argument that you see. Many people who come into this, they look at the environment and they go, hashing power is centralized. Well, first of all, what you're counting is mining pool centralization, which is very, very different. There is very low barriers to switching mining pools. And whenever we've seen centralization in mining pools, the hashing power has moved to other mining pools. There's no reason to stay with a mining pool if that creates systemic risks for Bitcoin, and miners are not stupid. Mining hash rate, in fact, is not as centralized as pools and is much more difficult to measure its degree of centralization. But here's the irony. Do you know when mining power was most centralized? 2009.
Yeah.
There was one miner.
One miner, Satoshi.
And then there were 2, and then there were 3. And since then, we've only ever increased the decentralization of mining. Even as recently as 2017, we had significant concentration of both ASIC production in the form of Bitmain ASICs and the use of those ASICs as one of the biggest mining powers and pools in Bitmain, and effectively they ended up blowing themselves up over SegWit and big blocks and making some very wrong-headed moves, and proved that even with that concentration of mining power and enormous amount of money, they were not able to break the consensus rules.
Yeah, and that led to today we have multiple ASIC, because I was going to tell that. It's like, it's not only mining concentration, it's also production of the hardware for mining that was highly concentrated back then. You had like 2-3 producers. Now you have multiple ASIC chips produced by different fabs that are the chip producers with multiple companies. So now we are in a point of decentralization in terms of the full value chain of mining, like, the chip design and printing, the machine assembly, and the mining power. So that has grown, and and
it was predictable. I predicted it in 2016. I said something very specific about this, which was that one of the reasons we saw so much concentration in both production of ASICs and the use of those ASICs in mining power was because the acceleration of chip density in mining went from 40 nanometers or more, all the way up to catching up to the front end of consumer grade fabrication and Moore's law. That was several orders of magnitude, 4 or 5 orders of magnitude over a period of just 5 or 6 years. Now, in that time, you would build an ASIC chip, put it in an ASIC, put it in a mining box, and ship it. And in 3 months from that time, it was already obsolete. Yeah. So there was no way you could even load it on a ship and send it to another country. It would have to go from the ASIC manufacturer to be put into production within a matter of weeks. Otherwise, it is worthless. Then in 2016, we hit the front end of Moore's law, a process that was seeing 1,000% or 5,000% improvement every year became a 100% improvement every 18 months, which is Moore's law, which is fast by any form of electronics, but is 100 times slower by comparison to what we had just a few years earlier. Now you buy mining equipment and you have a year, 2 years, 3 years even to exploit it in a profitable manner before it becomes obsolete. And that has completely changed the economics. And I predicted that in 2016. It's exactly what happened. We hit the front of Moore's law, everything slowed down. And as the ASIC density slowed down, the distribution pipeline expanded and lengthened so that you could now really broaden that footprint.
And it took the industry only 3 years to reach that point, because the first ASICs were delivered by Avalon back then in 2013. So it took 3 years to go from like 90s chip technology into the state of the art.
They did 20 years of chip development in 3 years.
Exactly. So
this kind of industries, when we discuss mining and consumption and stuff like that, this is the kind of industries that pushes technology forward, no? That makes pressure in getting less nanometers, in better energy, in better, it's the kind of technologies that pushes technology to grow and to evolve. So this is why we not only went into the state of the art, but we're also pushing it, to go deeper and even better chips and better developments.
Now, we've talked about a lot of the past, but since we're running out of time, why don't we talk a bit about the future?
Yeah, let's go. So this is the topics. This is, what I wanted to synthesize here is that we had a lot of crises, in English, but what we're building here is resilience, how did you say the word?
Which one?
Resilience.
Yes. All these attacks to Bitcoin just created resilience, made it stronger. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Yes. So Bitcoin is every time more resilient with every single situation that happens to it, and it can go.
Nicholas Nassim Taleb calls this anti-fragile. The idea that a system that dynamically evolves and adapts to threats becomes less fragile the more it is attacked. And we've seen that in practice. We've seen that with the internet, and now we're seeing it with Bitcoin. It has become more resilient over time because it's the opposite of fragile. It becomes less fragile as it gets attacked.
And that has to do with the value too, because today's value is based on that today is less fragile than before. And it's more trustable. So you can trust more in Bitcoin. You can trust that all these risks are not in the Bitcoin space now. Yes, so it's more trustable. And when people join now, they join with all this experience already gone through. Yes, so the value is also supporting the anti-fragility of Bitcoin. No, but let's discuss what could happen in the near future. Yes?
Yeah, in the chat I noticed Matthias was commenting on this. I don't know if we can pull the chat up again, but Matthias was commenting that one of the possibilities is that Satoshi comes back. Yeah, it's at the top of it's at the top of the chat there. La aparición de Satoshi con 1,000,000 BTC.
Yes.
Right? And describing that as a disaster, and others have already talked about that. I think that's one of the things that people find one of the biggest threats.
Okay, and I mean, would you like to do a brief approach of what you think about Satoshi going out with 1 billion Bitcoins and dropping them into the market or not? How do you perceive this threat? The real Satoshi, no?
Well, I think, okay, I think there are good reasons to believe at this point that that either the keys are destroyed, Satoshi is dead, or both, or big parts of that have been destroyed. There's no reason to believe that we would have that event occur since it hasn't already. And every year that goes past, you can believe more strongly that this is not going to happen. But of course, it's not impossible. And it ties in with another threat, which is quantum computing, because one other possibility instead of Satoshi appearing is that if you have quantum computers, we can create a new digital signature scheme that moves all of the users who want to, on a voluntary basis, to signatures that are quantum resistant. But if Satoshi's gone, if the keys are gone, if there's no one to move those keys, then at some point those keys become vulnerable to quantum computers, and then the quantum computer spends Satoshi's coins. Either way, you might end up with that scenario. I think that obviously increasing suddenly the supply by that amount would cause a flash crash. I think that's definitely possible.
Not the supply. The supply is the same.
The liquidity of supply.
And this is the thing. This is what I think. Even though if it happens, even though if one of those who are saying that they are Satoshi and they drive and push their Bitcoins to the market, there are still 21 million Bitcoins. There's still no way, yes, of creating Bitcoin from the thin air.
We're talking about possibly 5% of the, less than 5%, probably 3 to 4% of the total already issued supply becoming liquid and potentially becoming available to sell, either all at once over a short period of time, right?
Yes,
or that's the fear.
But I think even if
it's just about the price, and yes, price will go up.
Exactly. That's the point. Is even if that happens, that will be like, of course, a big crisis for Bitcoin, and then, as Andreas was saying, we will have a flash crash. But the nature of Bitcoin will remain. So even if Bitcoin goes to $1,000, of course that will be a big delay. For example, 1,000 or 100. I don't know what kind of flash crash we are talking about. But let's say that it goes to a very, very low level because people panic, or they with that million Bitcoins, they have the ability to actually take the Bitcoin price all the way down, and the market cannot react fast enough. Even if that happens, 6 months later, a year later, Bitcoin will go back to what it was. And that supply will be available and will be part of the moving supply of Bitcoin. So, and that's, I think, one of the key attributes of Bitcoin. Is what I always say, Bitcoin doesn't stop concentration of power or value from happening. But what it does is that you cannot change, if you lose that concentration of power, in this case, by selling it to drop the price and crash the price to the bottom, that's the only action you can do. After that, you lost that power. Therefore, the system will take back, recover, and you cannot change the rules to recover that power back. So
right, and it hasn't changed. It hasn't changed the fundamentals at all.
Exactly.
It hasn't changed the limited supply. It hasn't changed the utility of the system. What it has done, in fact, is possibly created a supply liquidity event that allows a lot of people who missed an opportunity the first time round, but understand the fundamentals, to now participate on a much lower basis. And you know, I think a lot of people who do already understand the fundamentals and understand that in the long term it continues to maintain those fundamentals, the rules haven't changed at all, understands that that presents an opportunity to go and get in at a price that was not possible before. I think the same general dynamic also applies to all of the other market price manipulation strategies, as Diego said. What if China has accumulated a lot of Bitcoin or buys it secretly and then sells it all at once in order to create a price crash? Well, they've just spent a lot of money to do a market manipulation that ends up being a wealth redistribution. They've used yuan to buy Bitcoin, thereby increasing the price of Bitcoin. And then when they flash crash it, they've crashed the price, creating opportunities for others to buy in because the fundamentals haven't changed. The same thing if the US government did that, or anybody else did that.
Or a corporation.
Or any corporation did that. If Elon Musk decides that they want to switch to investing into Doge much more actively than Bitcoin, and dumps $1.5 billion into the market. So all of these market manipulations, keep in mind, the big difference between traditional markets and these markets is that in traditional markets, money buys you power, and power allows you to change the rules so that you make the money flow in your direction. In Bitcoin, money buys you money, but it doesn't buy you power, and that money cannot be converted into power over the rules. So you can't change the rules. And as Diego said, if you use your money to exert power on the market, you do so once, you get one shot at it, and the market then reacts, recognizing that you haven't actually achieved a change in the rules or in the power structure or in the control of the underlying system. And because this is a market that is always open, trades 24/7, cannot be shut down, you will get a correction.
And we understand this, because this is very important actually. If it is a market manipulation to drive the price down and that's it, okay. If it's a market manipulation to sell high and buy low, the only way of buying low is buying your Bitcoins. Yes. So don't because other people are not selling. Exactly.
They're not stupid enough to sell low.
So don't be stupid enough to sell. Yes, if it happens.
There will be plenty of people who will panic, and those people will be participating in a great wealth redistribution program and welfare program that helps many poor people acquire Bitcoin at very nice prices, very discounted prices.
So I expect people watching this to consider, yes, the price always as an opportunity, either to hold more, yes, but not to go into the manipulation of the market, yes, and just understanding that the only thing they need to do is keep holding to their coins, because they will keep being scarce in the future.
Yes, or not. It's okay. Listen, if you think that this is not worth your time and attention, that's perfectly fine too. Not everyone has to be interested in this particular technology or in this particular investment or in any of that. I mean, this is a voluntary system.
Well, let's discuss shortly Tether. Yes, Tether is one of today's main topics being discussed. Yes, myself, I have my opinion. I think it's like a benevolent cancer. Yes, that you eventually need to remove from the system. So you will eventually need to remove from the system, and it will drive. It will drive SOS. The cell phone was doing SOS.
This is a good way to show that this is a live show. No, it's like
proof of liveness. Yeah. Do you have to go? Is this an emergency?
Today's stable dollar, yes, is being very highly concentrated in Tether. I think that if eventually Tether fails or it's if it happens to be a failure or non-back or whatever, yes, it will just do an impact in the short term, yes, but it will redistribute into more stable coins the same kind of value, and it will go.
I think it falls in the same category of what we just discussed. No, it's like, okay, a lot of value. I think stable coins are a very valuable addition to the crypto economies, in the sense that, as I see this, and then Andreas can share his thoughts on this, but what we are building is when I say I'm saying Bitcoin and all the decentralized crypto economies that are growing around the concepts that Bitcoin brought to life, is a new financial infrastructure, a new decentralized financial infrastructure, but the money still remains on the traditional financial infrastructure. And while we only had highly volatile assets in the short term, like Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, people was getting in, and then some were taking profit and getting out and everything. But since we have stable assets, people is like getting in, and then if they want to take profit from volatility, they remain on this new infrastructure. And now what we are seeing is that on top of that, people is building financial services, decentralized financial services, what is called DeFi. And so now there's more attractive for people to come into this new decentralized financial infrastructure. So I think, at the end, it's only about like which rails are you using? Are you using centralized rails for your financial transactions, or are you using decentralized rails? But from a price perspective or an attack perspective, I think if Tether was all air, there were no backing in Tether, and suddenly all the Tether disappears. Of course, that will be a big hurt for this new infrastructure from a trust perspective. It might impact the Bitcoin price, but again, as the foundations of Bitcoin are solid, as the decentralization, the protocols remain trustable, the decentralized protocols remain trustable, then things will eventually go back to where they were before. It's like, it's just like a trust, confidence. And we have to remember that Tether is a custodial model. It's like you are trusting that.
That's the key. What you're talking about is that effectively we are back to the same conversation about centralized versus decentralized. Not your keys, not your stable coins, is the exact same conundrum. The problem with any form of centralized stablecoin is exactly the same problem as any form of centralized exchange. It concentrates risk, and it creates opportunities for that risk to be realized in ways that individuals can't control or diffuse or diversify in the system. Which is why what we should be paying attention to is not the stable coin aspect, which is the front end, but the how it is being held, which is the back end. Decentralized stable coins are actually not only a very valuable tool in this system, but they give us a viable way of moving beyond what we have today and making the system more robust. Once again, it all comes down to centralization or decentralization.
Yes, so at the end, this crisis is again an opportunity. If this deconcentration of money in Tether, because of the reason whatever happens, it goes to more decentralized stablecoins.
Well, I want to be careful because you say the crisis is an opportunity. I think that depends on what you do. Because if you are treating Bitcoin as a speculative investment, if you are invested in Bitcoin in ways that exceed your technical understanding, exceeds your financial means, you don't have a security backup for an emergency fund, for emergency expenses, etc., and you put yourself in a position where a large market correction will not only wipe you out, but will force you to go and sell at disadvantageous prices because you ran out of money to pay rent or to pay food or some other thing, then this will hurt. This is not an opportunity. This will hurt you. But the reason it will hurt is because You treated it as a speculative investment. You invested more than you should have. You didn't have an emergency fund backup, and you cannot kind of take a long-term approach on that volatility, and you are forced to realize those losses by being forced to gather cash or sell at the worst possible moment. So, there will be, I want to be very clear about this. When we talk about opportunity, we're talking about, in the big picture, these are not systemic threats to Bitcoin. Exactly. That does not mean they won't hurt people. They will hurt people. They will hurt people who have taken very high risks in a very volatile and experimental asset, and they're going to get burned because they mismanaged that risk.
All of the ones we've been discussing,
and I think even
all of the ones that we've been discussing have the same effect. Yes, when they lost their coins in empty coins, saving the coins there. When they lost the coins in my Bitcoinica and my wallet. I mean, it always impacts the individual. Yes.
Or if they found themselves selling in a panic when the price drops, or if they found themselves being forced to sell when the price drops because they ran out of money elsewhere.
Yeah, because I think what Andreas is talking about is also like people that, when we always know, when we talk about like how much to invest in Bitcoin, because people keep asking us, how much money, we always say, put the money that you can lose, that won't affect your financial stability, that if it goes to zero or whatever, you know that your financial stability is not at risk.
It's one of the reasons I disagree with some of the maximalist approaches to the whole HODL cult, or the stacking sats cult, where people are going out and taking out loans or depleting all of the financial resources to put absolutely everything into. Well, here's the thing. That strategy ultimately makes you less of a good hodler. You can't hodl if a single emergency forces you to sell, right? Exactly. You can't pretend as if life is going to continue and you won't have pandemic, unemployment, medical emergency that requires quick access to funds. So if you've put yourself in a position where one of those types of emergencies or a change in life circumstances forces you to sell, you're not a good hodler. And the reason you're not a good hodler is because you didn't have fiat, which is ironic, I know. But you should have fiat just so you can throw it at emergencies and not touch your stash, right?
Yes. And we were there because we went through so many of these valley of the death that we were there, like selling Bitcoins at a bad price. Because
I did. I mean, people are shocked that I ended up in 2016 effectively having to sell Bitcoin in 2013 and 2014 and 2015 and 2016. They're like, why aren't you a millionaire?
Because I had to live.
Because I had to live, because I had to pay rent, because the reality is it's very difficult to maintain that kind of ridiculous purity of focus.
And that is also one risk I wanted to raise, because I think, I've been saying this lately, because sometimes there is this Bitcoiner maximalist mentality that comes from the first world perspective, no? But truly, Bitcoin is tailoring two kind of people today. It's like the people who can save money for more than 2-3 years, safely save money for more than 2-3 years, that can be exposed to the Bitcoin volatility and maybe, and survive this valley of the death that we might have, because you buy at certain
between
price.
Halvings, yes.
Exactly. And that's maybe 20% of the population, the upper 20%. And then the other people is the people who is in economies that are so unstable that Bitcoin looks like a stable coin, like because you have 1,000% inflation per year and you have capital controls and you have no other resort to actually manage your wealth. But in between, you have everybody else that, needs to live.
It's this, and you hear these conversations where they say, every penny of my disposable income, I've sold my car, my gym equipment, I've sold my my motorcycle, I've sold my boat, and now I've put it all into Bitcoin. Well, dude, you're talking about disposable income. What the hell is that? You're talking about not taking vacations. Who was taking vacations? And you're talking about selling your car, your boat, your house, your motorcycle. And of course, yes, all that's showing is that you had large amounts of disposable assets, and you're switching from a consumer society to a savings mentality, which is fantastic. And I encourage that. And I've gone through that process. I've switched my mentality from consumerism to saving because of Bitcoin. But again, we have to recognize that's a privileged position.
Exactly.
If you ride the bus 20%. To go to your third job in your second shift after midnight, and you have zero disposable income, and in fact you're in debt, none of those things are possible.
And why I was throwing that is because I think that is a risk as well. It's like that Bitcoin becomes concentrated, and that's something I want to pick your brains, Andreas, on that topic. It's like, what if Bitcoin becomes something that it's managed and distributed among that 20% of the population who is like in the top 20%, and we lose the opportunity of Bitcoin to be a tool for everybody and to be a tool of liberation and freedom for every human being in the world. No? So,
well, to the argument that you made, I think, first of all, that has already happened and is continuing to happen. The truth is, we live in a world where wealth inequality is structural in society and will continue to be so. Pareto distribution or 80-20 distributions occur naturally in human societies as a result of competition, but also as a result of systemic differences in the starting point. People are not on a level playing field. We do not have an actual meritocracy anywhere at any time in human history. Here's the difference, though. Bitcoin doesn't fix wealth inequality. People who have more dollars can obviously buy more Bitcoin. And so people who start with more dollars end with more Bitcoin in this scenario. When Elon Musk puts $1.5 billion into Bitcoin, you're like, oh my God, that's a lot of money. No, it's 0.2%, 0.2% of the net worth of the richest person on earth, right? So it's a laughable amount for their investment portfolio. So of course, Elon is going to be able to buy more Bitcoin because he started with more dollars. The biggest difference about this system is that having more Bitcoin doesn't allow you to change the rules. This is about a system of rules without rulers, where if you have a greater access to money, you can't suddenly change the rules and make sure that the money just flows downhill into your pocket by tilting the playing field in your benefit. And that is a critical difference, because the traditional financial system is full of these examples of not only are the rich getting richer, but the rich are getting richer faster because they've tipped the entire economy to pour money into their pockets. It's called the Cantillon effect at the monetary stage, and it is this whole system of economic subsidies and monopolies and protections that exist that make that system unfair.
Yes.
Bitcoin can't fix that, but what it can fix is ensure that you all have to play by the same rules.
Yes. No, I agree. I just wanted to bring this, like,
yeah, of course,
it's a topic that many Bitcoiners don't think about. No, it's like
yes. Even though that's what one of the things I asked in another interview some days ago. That if we all are convinced, really convinced, that Bitcoin will go up in value because of being scarce and out there, but we're really convinced of that. And we are convinced that it's a way that whenever it goes up, it distributes value to everyone, to every single holder. Yes, I think that if we do believe in that, so we should all assume the responsibility of helping others to join. When we started in 2013, and all the projects we've been doing since then was not for the 20%. was for everyone, every single person, yes, that was here to listen. And I can say that I know hundreds, thousands of people that went through our talks or stuff or things that Andreas does and many people in the industry do, with the responsibility of helping the small ones also to join into this. So I think that this topic about the concentrations is inevitable, but it only creates us the responsibility of being active about helping others to understand, yes, and giving opportunities to others by joining. That's also eventually the concept of es hora, hora. No, it's like we don't want to push everybody to go without understanding, and that's important. You need to understand, yes, before investing, but also you don't want to let people out of the space, yes, and you really want to convince them that this is something that they should put focus on today, because it's a wealth distribution. Whenever it goes up, it's wealth distribution. It's not it's like a universal income distribution, yes, but natural, not
through disinflation. And that's the other really big factor that plays into a more equitable future, is this idea that inflation doesn't work the same for everyone in the world. When you're poor, inflation will destroy your savings, but all of your debt will be marked up at ridiculous percentage points. When you borrow as a poor person from a bank using a credit card or something like that, you pay 15, 20, 30% interest per annum on that debt. But that same bank is getting money at 0% interest, or maybe 1% or 2% interest, well below the actual inflation rate. So they're able to use debt to cancel the effect of inflation, and then turn around and push that debt onto the poor, which takes inflation and magnifies it and makes it worse. So inflation acts as a continuous transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich. And the inverse, if you're in a system that has disinflation like Bitcoin, it acts as a continuous reinvestment in the wealth of everybody in the system. And that's one of the big differences of this system. It doesn't help you change the fact that we do not live in an equal society or in an equal world, but it does help reduce some of that inequality from growing.
Yes, and gives you a safe haven, no?
A safe haven, yeah, absolutely. Which, you know, two Argentinians and a Greek discussing safe havens is really a very appropriate. Let
me bring eventually the last point. Yes, even though we had a big list, actually we had still mining eventually a topic if you want. But what about CBDCs? How do you see the CBDCs issuance? Could it become a kind of risk to the system? Could the government say, now that we have this, we want to I mean, it's a mix between things, no?
Yeah, the future, like blockchain was the future in 2016. I think it's a...
Well, central bank digital currencies are, I think, very dangerous, because what they do is they disguise a mechanism of control and surveillance that's going to be much worse than what we have today. Ultimately, I think central bank digital currencies are part of a plan of creating a cashless society. They're part of a plan of digitizing money completely, but digitizing it in a very centralized and controlled way. Central bank digital currencies will inevitably lead to negative interest rates, which means that your savings will be taxed directly in order to fund inflation and to magnify that effect. And they'll also be used to create more barriers so that you can't exit. I recently did a talk about Currency Wars 2, all of the ships are sinking, where I described Bitcoin as a lifeboat and national currencies as a cruise ship. Well, central bank digital currencies is looking at everybody who is interested in lifeboats and saying, we're going to paint the cruise ship orange, and now it's a big lifeboat. You're like, painting it orange doesn't make it a lifeboat. That's not why we're interested in the lifeboats. We're interested in the lifeboats because the cruise ship is sinking, and painting it orange doesn't change its sinking. All it does is change its external appearance. Central bank digital currencies are applying the digital currency moniker as a thin layer of paint to cover something that is continuously sinking and in fact will sink faster. Not only that, but part of painting it like a lifeboat is also welding all of the doors shut so you can't leave. This is a very, very dangerous phenomenon. And of course, a lot of people will be enticed into it, just like a lot of people go and use Facebook instead of the internet. People will use central bank digital currencies. There will be all kinds of incentives to do it. There are going to be discounts on your taxes. There are going to be greater opportunities to use it in retail. It's going to be convenient. And it's going to be very efficient, but only efficient in terms of taking away control of your money very efficiently. I think it's a very dangerous phenomenon, but it's not dangerous to Bitcoin. It does not compete against Bitcoin, because ultimately the reason you want Bitcoin is precisely because of the dangers of central bank digital currencies. They cannot compete because they don't solve any of the problems of centralization. They only make them worse.
We totally agree. We totally agree with this concept. And actually, I think that it might also create a higher level of war between themselves. Today, creating all these CBDCs, the US dollar will have a higher level of competition with the yuan and the European one. So it will be a war that finally the debris of all this war will come down to Bitcoin also. So I also think it will be like a new space of
currency wars.
Of currency wars that we haven't seen yet. Yes. And even though in the short term it will eventually do something to the Bitcoin price, and I think that in the mid and long term it will only re-explain why Bitcoin is so different and so unmanipulated as those that you thought it was a good idea to.
Yeah, if your country is doing a central bank digital currency, you need Bitcoin more than ever. That's when you start looking for the exits. I do think we're going to see more fragmentation of the world economy and more overt acts of economic warfare and hostility between nations because of central bank digital currencies. Ultimately, what central bank digital currencies do is they massively increase the power of the state, both over individuals, but also over corporations and private companies. And they allow manipulation of such a degree that it's going to be very difficult for the people who are in charge of these things to avoid the appeal of corruption. The motivation will be very, very high to breed corruption in that environment.
But don't you think, Andreas, that it can also be a two-sided sword for them, because it will bring a level of transparency for the monetary system that they are not accustomed to?
I don't think it's going to bring a level of transparency at all. I think central bank digital currencies will have will not have auditability built in.
Okay, so you think they will do it in an obscure way? They are not going to keep the transparency values that we have in open blockchains or decentralized blockchains?
Oh, absolutely not. Not only that, but one of the biggest crimes you can commit in a central bank digital currency environment is to leak the actual database sums.
Yeah.
Use third parties to trace what they want to trace and to untrace the things that they don't want to be traced.
Yes, exactly. Transparency for you, but not for me, my friend. That's basically what's going to happen. They can use the transparency selectively against political enemies. So they will transparent to your finances in order to use that as a political weapon, while using secrecy for both the central bank issuance, which is going to be the biggest secret, but also for government spending. And the excuse for this, of course, as always, will be for reasons of national security.
Yeah, well, absolutely. They are starting to mention cryptocurrencies connected, for example, with weapons of proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. So when you pull those cards, it's basically because you want to bring, like, you know, heavy excuses to say, oh, we need to monitor this, we need to audit and control this because it's connected to these the worst crimes in humanity. But I think, yeah, I agree. I think the one of the biggest fights or challenges we have ahead in the next decade will be the fight for privacy, because I think we have been discussing this in the past. No, the digitalization of money in centralized systems or in this kind of, like, you know, obfuscated blockchains that we are mentioning can be a tool for mass surveillance. And I think Bitcoin and decentralized blockchains, truly decentralized blockchains, are the only way where we can provide certain level of protection for privacy while we can scale our societies and make them more fair. So I think that is a fight we will have to give in the next decade.
Yeah, and we're going to need to fight harder, because right now Bitcoin's privacy is pathetic.
Yeah,
we're going to need to do a lot better than we are now. And it's one of the reasons why I've been strongly talking about why privacy is the top priority for changes in the Bitcoin code base, because that's one priority we cannot let go. We can't do that later.
yes.
In 2015, I used to feel that scaling was our top priority. And in 2015, I realized for the first time that scaling we could do later, but privacy we could not. And because it was already obvious that the power and control over the protocol was beginning to ossify and become more and more contentious, it was even more important to prioritize privacy instead of scaling. A lot of people were surprised by that change in opinion for me. And of course, felt that it must have been because of the fabulous bribes I got.
which we all know you got, but you know,
yes,
tailing on the shots and everything.
But you know that.
If you want to share some with me, I can change also my opinion.
I have this opinion, but if you don't like it.
Yeah, Rodolfo, we all know you're Satoshi, so just send me the check whenever you can.
So before closing, I want to say thanks, not to Andreas, say thanks to the ones who support us. Yes, say thanks to ePro App, Crypto 24/7, and Talentland. Yes, who are the news media outlets that are restreaming our content. Yes, and actively supporting and sharing all the things that we do from LABITCONF. So thank you to them. Yes, I want to thank also to all the sponsors that usually support LABITCONF. LABITCONF, as you all know, it's a non-for-profit project. Yes, and it's actually sponsors are supporters, are not sponsors. It's people helping us to do the things that we do. Yes, helping us to do all the other projects that we support. And so thanks to every single one that supports. Thanks to Andrea that supports LABITCONF actively.
Yes.
No, thank you for inviting me and for organizing this again. Once again, it's always a pleasure to meet with both of you, my dear friends, and it's always a pleasure to be invited to these things, and an honor for me. Thank you.
Well,
Andreas. It's a great honor to have you.
Yes, thank you, Diego, for joining me today. But I think this is enough for one day. Eventually, we will redo some.
Yeah. We left some juicy topics because I think the fight for privacy is one of the biggest threats for Bitcoin, and we left like right there. But I think we will have other opportunities.
Today in Argentina, you have these Cambridge studies saying that mining is 127 terawatts, and it's the same amount of terawatts that uses Argentina. So this is a topic for Argentina, like could be relevant, and I think it's something that we all know that it is relevant, the amount of power being consumed, and that's not the topic to be seen and actually. But bueno, I think that it's good for today. Thank you, Andreas, for this 1.5 hour of talk. Yes, and bueno, thank you everyone who's been watching us and all the others that will be watching us after the talk. See you.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Chevy.